Ryan and Emily had always been the picture of a perfect couple. Married for 5 years, they lived in a cozy suburban home on a quiet street, surrounded by the comforts of their successful, well-rounded lives. Ryan worked a steady job at a financial firm, a position he'd earned through years of hard work, while Emily was a social media influencer who had built a brand around her lifestyle. They had their routines: morning coffee together, evening walks with their dog, and weekends spent with friends or family. Everything seemed perfect. But lately Ryan had started noticing small changes. Nothing major, just little things that gnawed at him, leaving him unsettled. Emily, once warm and loving, had become increasingly distant. She'd spend hours on her phone, barely looking up during dinner, always lost in her messages. At first, Ryan chalked it up to her busy schedule. She was growing her influencer career, after all, and the pressure to stay relevant online was constant. But as the days passed, his gut told him something more was going on. He'd ask her about her day, and she'd brush him off with vague answers, never offering much detail. The dinners they used to enjoy together felt quieter, as if she was there but not really present. Ryan felt the cold distance between them, something he couldn't explain. She seemed to be slipping away, little by little. And yet, every time Ryan tried to bring it up, Emily would reassure him, laughing it off as if he were overreacting. "You're just being paranoid, Ryan. Work's been crazy lately." That's all, but no matter how many times she said it, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And deep down, he knew that the more he ignored it, the worse it would get. It started with small things, slight shifts in Emily's behavior that Ryan couldn't quite place. At first, he tried to convince himself it was just the stress of her work. After all, being a social media influencer wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. The constant pressure to stay relevant, the endless collaborations, the demands of her followers, it was exhausting. But Ryan couldn't help feeling like there was more to it. It wasn't just work. One evening, Ryan came home early from the office, hoping to surprise Emily with dinner. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt too still. As he walked through the living room, he noticed Emily's phone lying face up on the coffee table. She was in the bathroom, so he had a moment to himself. His eyes lingered on the screen, and for a brief second, he felt a strange impulse, a curiosity that he couldn't ignore. The phone was unlocked, as if Emily had forgotten to lock it, and it was open to her messages. Ryan's heart skipped a beat as he saw a new text, sent just a few minutes ago from an unknown number. The message read, "I can't stop thinking about you. The weekend was amazing. I miss you already." Ryan stared at the message, his mind racing. Who was this? Why was Emily receiving messages like this? The words were innocent enough on the surface, but they felt off. He quickly glanced away, almost as if he'd done something wrong, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Emily had always been protective of her phone, never leaving it around unattended. It wasn't like her to be careless, but he quickly put the phone back, his heart pounding. Maybe I'm just overthinking, he thought, trying to shake off the unease that had settled deep in his stomach, but it didn't work. The feeling only grew stronger as the days went by. Emily came out of the bathroom, unaware of Ryan's brief glimpse into her secret. She smiled, asked him how his day was, and kissed him on the cheek. But Ryan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The unease that had started with the text message grew into a worry, one that he couldn't ignore. Every time he tried to bring it up with Emily, she'd laugh it off, call him paranoid, or accuse him of being too controlling. But Ryan's gut told him that the problem was bigger than just her work schedule or a few careless texts. One Thursday evening, Ryan decided to follow his instincts. He had been working late, but something inside him urged him to leave the office early. He told himself it was just a chance to surprise Emily, to shake things up. But as he drove home, his thoughts swirled with doubts. When he arrived, Emily's car wasn't in the driveway. He paused for a moment, his mind racing. She had told him earlier that she was going to be working late, but Ryan hadn't expected her to leave before he got home. He tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His unease deepened. Minutes later, he saw her car pulling into the driveway. But this time, there was a man with her. A man Ryan didn't recognize. They weren't kissing, but they were close, too close for Ryan's comfort. As Emily and the man, Jake, laughed together, they stood at the entrance of the car, talking in low voices. Emily touched Jake's arm, a gesture that seemed too intimate for just a casual colleague or friend. Ryan's heart sank as he watched them walk toward the door, their hands brushing in a way that suggested something deeper than mere friendship. Ryan felt his chest tighten. The scene played in his mind over and over: Emily, laughing, touching another man like she once touched him. The realization hit him hard. She was having an affair. The man was Jake, someone from her recent work projects, a name he had heard only in passing. But now, seeing them together, it all made sense. The late nights, the distance between them, the constant distraction. Ryan stood frozen in the driveway, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. He knew he couldn't let this slide. He had to confront her. But before he could act, Emily turned, catching sight of him standing there. Ryan, her voice was high-pitched, a little too surprised. Her eyes shifted between him and Jake. The color drained from her face as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Emily, whose this Ryan's voice was steady, though his insides were in turmoil. He knew exactly who Jake was. The question wasn't about who he was, it was about what they were doing together. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She fumbled with her keys, unable to look Ryan in the eye. Jake stood awkwardly, his hands in his pockets, not knowing whether to stay or leave. Ryan felt a wave of anger rise in him, but he didn't let it show. He was numb, cold. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "I don't know what you think you saw," Emily finally stammered, her voice defensive. "Jake and I are just friends. There's nothing going on." Ryan didn't buy it. He knew what he had seen, and nothing Emily could say would change that. "Don't lie to me, Emily," he said, his voice calm but with an underlying edge. "I saw everything. The touch, the laugh, the way you look at him. It's more than just friends, isn't it?" Emily's eyes flickered with panic. "Ryan, please," she whispered, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "I'm sorry. It's complicated." Ryan wasn't having it. "No, Emily. What's complicated is the fact that you've been lying to me. Behind my back, you've been with him. You've betrayed me." Words stung more than Ryan could have imagined. Emily's tears fell freely now, and she looked at Jake, who awkwardly shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable in the middle of the confrontation. "Ryan, I never meant to hurt you," Emily said, her voice breaking. "But things between us haven't been the same for a long time. You don't understand. Jake makes me feel alive. I was just looking for something more. Something I wasn't getting from you." Ryan's chest tightened as he processed her words. "So, this is about me?" "About us," he asked, the pain in his voice cutting through the calm he had been trying to maintain. "You could have talked to me, Emily. Instead, you decided to throw everything away for him." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed stuck. She looked at Jake, then back at Ryan, but she knew it was too late. The damage had been done. Ryan turned away, walking back toward the door of the house. He didn't want to hear any more excuses. He didn't want to look at her, not after what he had just seen. The trust they had built was gone, shattered in an instant. Emily stood there, her voice trembling, but Ryan didn't look back. There was nothing she could say to undo the hurt, to undo the betrayal. It was done. Ryan's mind raced as he walked away from Emily, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on his chest. He could still hear her soft voice calling his name, her desperate pleas echoing in his ears. But he didn't stop. She had broken something deep inside him, and there was no way to fix it. He locked himself in the study, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of everything. The anger surged within him, but beneath it was a cold, calculating resolve. He had been blindsided by Emily's affair, but now it was time to make her feel the consequences of her actions, just as she had made him feel humiliated, betrayed, and worthless. Ryan thought about the way Emily had laughed at his pain, mocking him for being paranoid and controlling. She had made him believe he was the one who was wrong, the one who couldn't trust her. But now, the truth was undeniable, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. He needed to expose her, make her pay for the lies, for the affair, and for the way she treated him like a fool. That's when it hit him. He knew exactly how to do it. Ryan had a plan. It would be calculated, public, and humiliating, exactly what Emily deserved. The following day, he hired a process server, a professional who would deliver legal documents and set the wheels of his plan in motion. He didn't want to make it just about divorce papers. No, this would be more than that. He wanted to make sure Emily's betrayal was seen by everyone, her family, her friends, and anyone who had ever looked up to her as the perfect wife. Ryan had arranged a family dinner, something Emily had suggested weeks ago. She always enjoyed having the family over, and it was the perfect opportunity for him to execute his plan. Emily had been so distracted with Jake and her affair that she barely paid attention when Ryan mentioned it, agreeing to the dinner without hesitation. She thought everything was fine between them. She thought she could keep lying. But Ryan wasn't about to let that happen. He spent the next few days preparing. He spoke with the process server and made sure that everything would go according to plan. He had a large, decorated box prepared, something that looked innocent enough at first glance. Inside, however, was a stack of legal documents, divorce papers, along with a photo of Emily and Jake at the cafe, holding hands and sharing a kiss. The photo was printed on glossy paper, clear and damning. Ryan could already picture Emily's face when she saw the photo, the look of shock and humiliation as her affair was laid bare for everyone to see. He could already hear the gasp from her family, the disbelief in their voices as they learned the truth about their perfect daughter, niece, or sister. Everything was set. The plan was in motion. The night of the dinner arrived. Emily, unaware of what was coming, buzzed around the kitchen, preparing her favorite dishes. She hummed to herself, seemingly at ease. Ryan played his part, pretending everything was normal. He greeted her family with a warm smile and made small talk, all the while holding his breath, waiting for the right moment. At dinner, Emily's family was in high spirits. They laughed, ate, and shared stories. But Ryan couldn't focus on any of it. His mind was elsewhere, carefully waiting for the moment to arrive. His heart raced, but he remained calm on the surface, a mask of civility hiding the storm inside. Finally, as dessert was being served, Ryan stood up and announced, "I have a gift for you, Emily." Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "What is it?" Ryan motioned for the process server to enter. The man stepped into the room, carrying the large box wrapped in bright, colorful paper. He walked calmly to the table and placed the box in front of Emily. "Emily Carson," the process server said, his voice professional and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You've been served." Emily's face immediately dropped. She blinked in confusion, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the box. Her family looked at her, puzzled. They had no idea what was going on, but there was something in the air, something ominous. Ryan didn't say a word as Emily slowly lifted the lid of the box, her face a mask of disbelief. Inside, she saw the divorce papers, the final blow. Her hands shook as she pulled them out. But that wasn't all. Underneath the papers, she saw the photo, a shot of her and Jake at the cafe, caught in an intimate moment. The room went silent. Emily's face drained of color as she looked from the papers to the photo. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to comprehend what was happening. "What is this?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. Ryan stood tall, his voice calm but cutting through the tension in the room. "This is what you've been hiding, Emily. Your affair with Jake. I'm done pretending. This marriage is over." The process server stepped forward, placing a final set of papers on the table. "These are the official divorce papers. You've been served," he repeated, as the family stared, horrified. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She stood up, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around her. "Ryan, no. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Please, let's talk about this." But Ryan had no more words for her. He had already made his decision. The damage had been done. The room was still. The weight of Ryan's words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating Emily's ability to speak. Her hands trembled as she clutched the divorce papers, her face pale. The photo of her and Jake, once so casually taken, now felt like a dagger to her chest. Her family sat in stunned silence, staring at her, their eyes a mix of disbelief and disappointment. Emily's voice cracked as she turned toward her parents, pleading, "Mom, Dad, please, you have to understand. This isn't what it seems. It was just a mistake, a temporary lapse." But Ryan wasn't listening. He stood across the room, his expression cold, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her. "There's no excuse, Emily," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You chose this. You chose him over me. You've been hiding this for weeks, laughing at me, making me feel like I was the one with the problem. But I'm not the one who's been lying." Her mother looked at her with hurt in her eyes. "Emily, is this true?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Is this how you've been living?" Emily's face crumbled. She tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was lonely. Things haven't been the same with Ryan for a while now. I didn't know how to fix it." Her father shook his head, unable to look at her. "You should have come to us. We would have helped." But this, well, the weight of her family's disapproval hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She had never expected to see them look at her with such shame. For all the public image she had cultivated, her perfect marriage, her perfect life, everything was falling apart in that instant. And it wasn't just Ryan who was done with her. Her family, the very people who had always supported her, were now stepping back, unwilling to take her side. Emily turned to Jake, who had been standing awkwardly in the corner of the room, not knowing what to do. He shifted uncomfortably under the gaze of Ryan's family. Emily's heart sank further. Jake wasn't her savior. He was part of the mess, and now he looked like a man who had nothing to offer her but more of the same, more lies, more heartbreak. Ryan watched Emily, his expression unreadable. "You're not getting away with this, Emily," he said quietly. "You can apologize all you want, but you'll have to face the consequences. This marriage is over." Emily stood frozen, the tears streaming down her face as she realized the depth of her mistake. She had lost Ryan. She had lost the respect of her family, and now she was left to face the mess she had created. Ryan walked out of the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. He didn't look back. Ryan couldn't escape the image of Emily's tear-streaked face, the look of devastation that followed him out of the house. For a moment, as he stood on the porch, he questioned whether he had done the right thing. But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. His actions weren't about revenge, they were about reclaiming his dignity, about putting an end to the lies that had poisoned their marriage. That night, Ryan didn't sleep. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but the one that kept coming back to him was that Emily was no longer his concern. The marriage was over, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of freedom, a freedom he hadn't realized he needed. The next few days were a blur. Emily tried calling, texting, pleading for another chance, but Ryan didn't answer. He didn't need to hear her apologies, her excuses. He had spent too many years convincing himself that things would get better. He wasn't going to waste any more time on someone who had so easily betrayed him. He turned his attention inward, focusing on his career, his health, and the things he had neglected for so long. For the first time in years, Ryan gave himself permission to focus solely on himself. He started going to the gym again, meeting up with friends he hadn't seen in months, and diving back into work with a renewed sense of purpose. His boss noticed the change in him, complimenting him on his drive and productivity. But Ryan didn't need anyone's approval. He was doing this for himself, for the man he had lost in the chaos of his marriage. He needed to rebuild, not just his life, but his sense of self-worth. The days turned into weeks, and Ryan found peace in the quiet. He started picking up hobbies he had abandoned years ago, reading, cooking, even gardening. Simple things that made him feel grounded, connected to the world outside the whirlwind of his old life with Emily. Meanwhile, Emily's world was falling apart. The morning after the family dinner, she woke up alone in their empty house. The silence was deafening. She tried to call Ryan again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She sent him a message. "I'm sorry. I know I messed up. Please, let's talk." I need to explain, but she knew, deep down, that there was no explanation that could undo what she had done. Her reputation, once carefully curated for her followers, was now tarnished. Her social media accounts, once filled with happy photos of her and Ryan, were now filled with questions, rumors, and harsh comments, and people began to speculate about her affair with Jake. Some of her followers turned on her, calling her a fraud, a liar. Emily couldn't handle it. She deleted posts, tried to maintain some semblance of control, but the damage was done. Jake, the man she had thought would be her escape, was nowhere to be found. He had distanced himself after the dinner, his messages becoming cold and distant. Emily realized that Jake wasn't her savior. He was just another chapter in her broken story, another escape from the reality she hadn't been able to face. She had turned to him because she was dissatisfied, but now she understood that the dissatisfaction had nothing to do with Ryan. It was her own unhappiness, her own inability to confront the truth of her actions. The days passed, and Emily found herself alone in a way she had never been before. She had lost Ryan, her family's trust, and the life she had so carefully built. In the stillness of her empty house, Emily finally understood the gravity of her mistakes. She had sacrificed everything for a fleeting affair, and now she was left with nothing but the ruins of her choices. Her mind kept returning to Ryan, the man who had loved her, who had been patient with her, who had given her everything. She had thrown it all away. She had destroyed the one person who had truly cared for her. But it was too late. Ryan was gone, and she didn't know how to fix the mess she had made. Ryan's new life had begun, and though the road ahead wasn't always clear, he finally felt free. The weight of Emily's betrayal had left scars, but those scars were beginning to fade. He had rediscovered his strength and his worth, something he hadn't realized he'd lost until now. One evening, while walking through a park, Ryan ran into an old friend, Alex, who hadn't seen him in months. They talked about everything: the divorce, the pain, and the freedom that followed. Alex had always been a good listener, someone Ryan could count on. Their conversation was comforting, reminding Ryan how much he had grown. As the weeks passed, Ryan slowly began to date again. Nothing serious at first, just casual meetups with people he found interesting. He wasn't in a rush. For the first time in a long time, he was enjoying the space he had created for himself. He wasn't defined by his marriage or the betrayal. He was defined by his choices, now choices that put himself first. Then one day, as he was leaving his favorite coffee shop, he saw her, Emily. She was standing across the street, her face pale, her expression full of regret. She didn't see him at first, but when she did, their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ryan stood still, the past rushing back. He could see the pain in her eyes, but he also saw something else, something more subtle. Guilt. Emily had changed, but it didn't matter anymore. The chapter was closed, and there was nothing left to say. He walked past her without a word, not out of anger, but out of a deep understanding that they were no longer part of each other's worlds. It was over. Later that evening, as Ryan watched the sunset from his apartment balcony, he felt at peace. He wasn't the same man he had been when he first discovered Emily's betrayal. He had learned to rebuild, to move forward, and to trust himself again. The pain of the past had faded into the background, replaced by the quiet anticipation of a future he could now shape on his own terms. Emily, on the other hand, stood in the same spot for a long while after Ryan walked away. She didn't follow him. She knew, deep down, that no apology would bring him back. She had lost him forever. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Also, leave a like if you enjoyed it and drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. Your support means everything to me. And I'm excited to share more stories with you. Catch you in the next one.